Hi, everyone. This is Caroline from Fiat Integrative Health in Franklin, Tennessee, and you're listening to the Fiat Health Podcast. We believe that now more than ever, the healthcare industry has become a place of confusion. And over the years, we have been asked countless questions about what true health and integration for the whole person looks like. Join us every other week as we explore topics ranging from primary care and women's health to counseling and spiritual health. We're so glad you're here. Hey everyone, this is Ashlynn. Just wanted to add a quick note here that I did have some technical difficulties with my microphone during this episode, so please bear with us. And again, reach out if you have any questions after listening. Thanks for your support.
All right, welcome back to the Fiat Health Podcast. My name is Ashlynn. I'm a family nurse practitioner here at Fiat, and I I'm here today with Dr. Ed. He's our new medical director and physician. We are so happy to have him. And we are talking about GLP-1s today. Hot topic, especially in the integrative health world. So why don't you address this topic? Because it is very popular on social media and the news right now. But also, we have to address why these meds were created and how they're helpful. Originally they were designed to treat type 2 diabetes and now obesity, which is important. Type 2 diabetes is a very prominent illness in the United States. And we also have obesity as a big issue in this country. Over 100 million adults have obesity. So we want to talk about this medication because how can we use it to address health concerns, but in a more mindful way versus simple solutions. So we're going to talk about what GLP-1s are, how they work, what do we use them for, pros and cons, and how we can integrate these medications into our unique practice here at Fiat. If you have any questions that you can think of after listening to this podcast, shoot us a message on Instagram, head to our website at fiathealth.org. and let us know. So we're going to start, and I'll have you kind of talk about what GLP-1s are, how they work, and what they can do.
Yes, thank you, Ashlynn. And you're right. This is actually much bigger than a simple medical topic. This is getting to the zeitgeist of modern society. I don't think we've seen this much attention around a medication or a medication class since the likes of Viagra or Prozac. And in fact, the latest studies show that 1 in 8 Americans have tried a GLP-1. And it seems rather rapid for that large of an adoption, especially with the price tag around this. So it truly is more than what the discussions that are going on in doctors' lounges or in the hospitals. This is in the cafes, it's online, it's everywhere. People are interested and they're very engaged and there are very strong opinions. Imagine that. So let's go to the heart of it. What are GLP-1s and what's a little history around them? So interesting, in the 1980s, they started to study this very small population of lizards, the Gila monster, in the desert. And the reason they want to investigate them was the Gila monster evidently eats 3 or 4 times a year. But when it does eat, it eats very well, up to 50% of their weight. But then it's going to starve for a long period of time, and it needs excellent management of that glucose. And so they found that in the saliva of this lizard was this peptide that enabled the lizard to have this very long use of that one meal by monitoring and maintaining a steady state of glucose. And they realized that this could potentially translate to humans. And that's where we get the GLP-1s, which don't want to get hung up on a lot of jargon here, but GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptides. And that was the beginning. That was the first generation, actually way back in the 80s. When we think about GLP-1s now, you think of Wegovy or semaglutide or Mounjaro, tirzepatide. Those are actually Gen 3 and Gen 4.
Hard to keep up with all the names.
Yes. And it's probably don't get wrapped around them because they're about to change again. We're moving beyond Gen 4 and going into Gen 5 and plus. So these these hormones, these GLP-1s, there are hormones in the body. They are secreted in one area and do actions in other areas. They do three main things. The first thing it does is it actually decreases the release of insulin from the liver. So imagine you've just had a meal, and this is a natural occurring hormone in your body, this GLP-1. What normally happens is when you eat a meal, your liver can stop releasing its source of sugar because you're getting it from the meal. So it decreases the liver release of glucose. The next thing it does is it increases the insulin. It tells your pancreas, hey, monitor the sugar level. When it gets above a certain level, go ahead and start releasing that insulin so that we have this good homeostasis, a good level of your sugar. And then the third thing it does is it affects the gastric motility. So it'll slow down the normal movement, peristalsis of the food through the stomach and into the intestines. And so this fabricated GLP-1, the one that we've now created and we inject, is quite different than our natural occurring ones. The main the difference is how long it lasts. In our body, GLP-1 lasts very short. It's released with a meal, and it's consumed and broken down, and it stops its effect even before the nutrition is absorbed. What we've done now has been we've translated this into a medication that lasts well over 6 days into the 7th day. And essentially it has those three effects. It decreases the release of sugar from the liver, increases the insulin if the sugar is elevated, and it slows down that motion of the stomach. And then now what we're finding, and this is very common occurrence among majority of people who take these, is it gets rid of a thing called the food noise. And this gets to the reward and pleasure aspects of food and eating. And essentially what they have identified is that people who have insulin resistance and people who have experienced obesity have this food noise in their brain. Now, it's not specifically saying, a voice saying, go eat that piece of cake or go to McDonald's or whatnot. What it's doing is it creates a feeling of unrest and a feeling that it is only rewarded and satiated by eating foods. And many times by eating foods that are high in sugar or easily released sugar like carbs, et cetera. So now we're realizing it's really these four aspects. It's, again, stopping the sugar release, increasing the insulin, slowing down the movement, and now the food noise. And that combination is really the aspect that creates the quote-unquote miracle drug. So now that we've discussed how they actually work, let's look at why and how they're used. They were first developed to treat diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And so if you look at all the studies, there's probably about 10 major studies that have been done. The vast majority of them first look at diabetes. Why? Because if you go back to that lizard, the main thing was that lizard was able to have this very good homeostasis with its glucose, even though it just ate 50% of its weight. It did not disrupt the glucose metabolism. And if you think of what is happening in type 2 diabetics, it's two main things. It's insulin resistance. So when your body releases insulin, you have a lower effect on your body. So your body has to release more insulin to have the equivalent of someone who doesn't have diabetes. So it's that insulin resistance. And then what happens to your pancreas? Or the beta cells in your pancreas are constantly releasing this insulin. Well, when it's being taxed, when it's being told, hey, my sugars are still high, release more and more, you get this fatigue of the beta cells. They can't produce enough to keep up with the sugar. And then that's what really develops the metabolic view of type 2 diabetes, which we know has a tremendous downstream effect. The storage of sugar into fat, and then the fat that then starts to collect around organs, and the fat that's running in the blood cells then increases the bad cholesterol levels in your vessels, and those start to cause atherosclerosis, and that causes narrowing, and then that decreases the heart, the oxygen to the heart and to the kidneys, and then we start to have the buildup of fat in the liver, and it's toxic to the liver, so you start to have fibrosis. All of those stem from the two main issues, that the decrease in insulin sensitivity and then that beta cell fatigue and then the increase in that sugar. So that's when they started studying GLP-1s and addressing that glucose homeostasis. And they found out, actually, these quote-unquote miracle drugs really do address those very first two problems. And essentially the way they do that is by decreasing the amount of sugar that a person consumes. And how do they do that? Well, they stop the food noise, they slow down the stomach so you feel full longer, and they keep a great homeostasis of that insulin. So now you're not eating as much. Well, then you get your liver to release more and allows that liver to release enough glucose to keep that homeostasis. Your beta cells don't have to release as much insulin, so they're starting to calm down. And when they're calming down and there's not as much insulin because there's not as much glucose, your insulin resistance decreases, and now the cells in your body are more attuned and can listen to a normal release of insulin. And then that stops the sequela from all the other type 2 diabetes issues around your atherosclerosis in your liver, etc. So they initially attacked it with type 2 diabetes. But then they started to they did a select trial and said, what if you don't have type 2 diabetes? Can this really help patients who don't have type 2 diabetes? And again, indeed, it did find out that it did. Weight loss over a year somewhere with the Gen 3 semaglutide, somewhere between 15 and 20% weight loss. With the fourth generation tirzepatide, somewhere between 20 and 25% weight loss sustained over a year. But then what they also found in the SELECT trial is that it actually decreases 20% of all-cause mortality. And it goes even beyond just the weight loss. So everyone said, well, probably it's because if you lose weight, we all know if you lose weight, you have less strain on your heart, and probably that's where the benefits came from. And they realized that even those that did not lose significant amount of weight had a decrease in all-cause mortality. And then they looked at even more specific negative outcomes of obesity and type 2 diabetes. They call them MACE, or major adverse cardiac events like heart attacks and strokes. And again, significant decrease across the board. Decrease in hospitalizations for congestive heart failure, etc. So all of these benefits now they found for type 2 diabetes were applicable to obesity in itself. So truly it became this miracle drug. And now they're even finding other roles for GLP-1s. I don't know if you want to mention any of those.
Yeah. No, I think it just something to pause and think about is how beautiful it is that we were able to take such a unique creature from God's creation and use beautiful scientific minds to better our health. I think that's really beautiful. This very strange looking lizard.
Yes. And to think that we've, as humans, have been at this since the 1980s, which for myself is just yesterday, but for many of you listening to this podcast is way a long time ago, and we're still at it. We're still sitting down. We're now looking at the fifth and even sixth generation of turning this over and identifying how can we help humans. It's amazing.
It's beautiful. But, as Dr. Ed was saying, we're starting to discover new emerging roles for these medications. Specifically, I want to mention a few. One being PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a issue that a lot of women unfortunately experience, which is typically worse. I won't go into the nuances of what PCOS is, but is worsened by insulin resistance or caused by insulin resistance. And so these medications can be used to improve insulin sensitivity, reduce hyperinsulinemia, that word is hard for me to say, which is what fuels ovarian androgen production. So a piece of PCOS is elevated androgens, so those elevated testosterone levels, which then fuel those polycystic-looking ovaries. And the use of GLP-1s with this condition can restore hormonal balance, and even more importantly, which is something we address here in the clinic, is improve spontaneous ovulation and pregnancy. So it improves menstrual regularity and ovulatory function, reduces, like I said, those male androgens, testosterone levels, and can increase natural pregnancy rates, which is amazing. Something else it can address, the role of the liver in all of this. We have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is a metabolic disease. And there have been several meta-analysis and randomized controlled trials over the last few years that show that GLP-1 significantly improve liver outcomes through, yes, the weight loss piece, but also enhancing insulin sensitivity, right, of those beta cells in the liver, reducing inflammation. And we're seeing positive hepatic effects with these medications. And then another interesting one that I don't hear people talk about a lot is the use of these medications in cravings or addiction.
Absolutely.
We talked about food noise and that aspect of it, but there are very interesting studies that are looking at the brain's reward pathways. So, a person who has a addiction to a substance or a food, let's say, but substance, cigarettes, drug use, things like that, these drugs can modulate the brain's reward pathways and reduce cravings not just for food, but also for alcohol, nicotine, opioids, and other compulsive behaviors, because they work in receptors of the brain like the dopamine system. So it will dampen the rewarding effects of addictive substances and quiet those craving signals.
Absolutely. In fact, there hasn't been the large studies yet on this, but they did do mice studies, and definitively GLP-1s decreased the mice's use of cocaine, hyper addictive product. And even anecdotally online, a lot of people who are using GLP-1s are noticing their other addictions are being calmed by this, gambling addiction, as well as alcohol, et cetera. So you're right. This has perhaps that fourth area, that food noise is not specifically food noise, but is getting that more of a more fundamental, that dopamine reward system, and actually learning to calm that system down.
So now we kind of want to address the risks, side effects, limitations of these medications, because there are some. And so the biggest side effects that we hear and are reported in studies and just in our own practice are GI, gastrointestinal disruptions. So nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and or constipation, and abdominal pain. These affect up to 40% of users of these medications, which can disrupt treatment sometimes. So something that we'll talk to later is how important it is to be working with a provider that can help avoid or mitigate these side effects. These usually occur early on in treatment and often improve over time, slow dose titration, other lifestyle measures. But these are the largest reported side effects.
Absolutely. And I mean, when you think about that third aspect, the slowing down of the gastric emptying, that truly is if not explained and walked through with someone who's already been down this path before, your provider that has already seen this many times, it's actually the effect of the medication. It's seen as a side effect only because it's overwhelming you, and perhaps the dose has been pushed too fast, too high, too quick. And in fact, many people think, go fast, go hard, but a lot of the actual positive effects from this medication are obtained somewhere in the mid-range of the dosing, not at the max dose. And this gastric emptying, one of the scariest things is sometimes that gastric emptying does not go away when you stop the medication. Now, there is not long-term evidence that GLP-1s cause complete gastroparesis, i.e. the stomach stops working. But there is evidence that once the medication is stopped, there are few people that actually take weeks to even months for that normal speed to pick up again, which could be quite dangerous if you've lost all the way down to your normal weight and now you can't move your stomach. So again, very important to work with someone who's been down this road. A lot of people are like, oh, I've seen my friend lose 100 pounds. I want to do that now. And they want to push hard and push fast. And there is a reason why going slower with these medications, even though slow is in quotations because these are fast weight loss drugs.
Right. That's a great point. And then, other common side effects we see are injection site reactions. That is something that maybe we haven't said yet. These medications, as of right now, there's some newer oral versions coming out, but these are injectable medications. So if you didn't know that already, these require you to inject yourself with a needle. So we can always have an injection site reaction. And then there are a couple black box warnings or potentially severe and very rare, I will say, concerns. One being pancreatitis. Large studies have not been able to correlate a clear risk beyond what the pancreatitis risk already is. When you are obese or morbidly obese, your risk of pancreatitis increases already, right? But rapid weight loss itself can contribute to potential pancreatitis. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, working with a knowledgeable provider who's familiar with these medications is important to avoid that. Thyroid concern. So this is usually the biggest question that I get in the clinic because it is a black box warning. Like I mentioned, the FDA issues black box warnings when studies raise alarms, essentially. So rodent studies raise alarms about medullary thyroid carcinoma or cancer, but large cohort studies in 2025 specifically across millions of patients found no evidence of increased thyroid cancer risk in humans. But still, these drugs remain contraindicated in patients with a personal or family history of medullary thyroid cancer. People ask, will these cause thyroid cancer? There's no evidence that they will spontaneously cause thyroid cancer, but we do have to use discretion in patients who already have a history of thyroid cancer. And then the last concern is muscle loss. So what happens with rapid weight loss? We're also rapidly losing muscle. They go hand in hand. We do see in some studies that GLP-1s can cause anywhere from a 20 to 40% loss in lean mass reduction. So raising concerns about using these in older adults, let's say, who already have low muscle mass at their baseline. But again, working with a skilled provider who can help avoid muscle loss, for example, is going to be important with other lifestyle strategies that we're going to get to later on in the podcast. And then another one is gallbladder disease. Again, is that related to obesity as your risk is increased already, or the rapid weight loss? Again, something that your provider will help you monitor.
Right. And just real quick on that muscle loss, because this is one of the key issues that is debated. There is no debate about rapid weight loss, however you lose it, whether it's surgically, whether it's a restrictive will-only diet, whether it's through GLP-1s, et cetera. Rapid weight loss is always associated with a larger decrease in muscle mass and muscle, that sarcopenia.
Right. No matter how it's achieved.
Exactly. If you look at generation 3 versus generation 4, there's a slightly decreased muscle loss from going from semaglutide to tirzepatide. And even in the Gen 5, there's another mechanism that is going to start to work that will actually help protect the muscle loss. But as you were saying, working with a provider when you are prescribing these medications, we can start to limit that loss by focusing on diet, focusing on working out during this as well. It's not a time to just sit and lose weight and watch what happens. But there is a true problem here. When you stop a GLP-1, you will gain the weight back. That's almost a given. But the problem is you don't gain fat and muscle back. You lose that muscle, it's gone forever. But there's another thing that people need to take into consider here, and it's the difference between muscle loss and functional strength. So if you think of an individual who is morbidly obese, 75 plus pounds on them, they are walking around with a backpack, of weights that are 75 pounds. And when they stand up, they are standing up with 75 pounds. And when they are going upstairs, they're going up with this extra weight, 75 pounds. When you have that massive weight loss, even though you're losing up to 40% of that muscle mass, you don't need to lift that 75-pound backpack anymore. So the muscle loss is essentially seen as, well, while it's a negative, it's not needed because you're not lifting that backpack consistently. That being said, muscle loss is a key problem because this medication is not hey, I'm going to take this med, lose my weight, get off it, and enjoy life for the future. It's going to require a lot of significant lifestyle changes and potentially a long-term use of this medication.
Very true. It's a good point. And that kind of leads us into our next topic is, how do we utilize these medications here at Fiat as a tool and not necessarily a Band-Aid, right? We have to go back to our core pillar. What are our core pillars? What's our mission here at Fiat? To address mind, body, soul, right? So as primary care providers, we're looking at the whole thing, right? So will we prescribe one of these medications if we don't have extensive conversations about, number one, informed consent, which is essentially what we're doing with this podcast, right? Side effects, risks, benefits, et cetera. But also, and we've talked about this before in other podcasts. What are you doing at home? What does your lifestyle look like? Addressing diet, anti-inflammatory, whole food, organic food, quality nutrition, which you hear us talk about all the time, gradual low impact movement. So moving your body, getting out into creation, getting sunlight, using the physical body that you've been blessed with and not letting it waste away, right? Mindful eating, sleep optimization. We talk about sleep all the time, how sleep is such a core of health. So we're going to address all of these things. We're also going to address underlying things. We are big here on, getting to root cause, right? That's kind of a buzzword. Everybody likes that word. But, we're not going to prescribe these medications based off one complaint, right? We're going to investigate thyroid, nutritional deficiencies, you name it, hormones, et cetera. And that may reveal to us that, yes, we do need to use these GLP-1s as a tool because you do have insulin resistance, or you do have PCOS, or you do have type 2 diabetes. But how can we approach your health from a multifaceted view? We're also going to address gut health. There's really, really interesting studies, and I encourage you to look at them, that they have found certain strains of bacteria in the gut that can naturally increase natural GLP-1 levels, which we talked about. They're not as strong, won't cause a significant weight loss as these medications, the synthetic version. But, with realistic expectations, we can expect a 5 to 10% sustained weight loss when we come up with a solid lifestyle adjustment plan, right? So the strains I'm specifically talking about are Akkermansia and a strain of bifidobacterium called Bifido infantis. I won't get into kind of the nuances of that. That's something that you can address with your provider, but it's really interesting. So that's another thing we like to do here is address gut health. We're, do some comprehensive gut testing, inflammation testing, et cetera, to see where can we fill in some gaps with lifestyle first, right? And then evidence-based supplements, ones you've probably heard of, berberine, inositol, resveratrol, fiber. All of these need to be under the guidance of a provider. Please do not take one of these that I just mentioned and just start it willy-nilly.
This is not medical advice. This is medical information, but not advice. And you must speak with your provider before you can do any of these.
So there's lots of ways that we can utilize these medications along with addressing all other aspects of your health, mind, body, spirit. So I think that's important to note.
Absolutely. The holistic approach is the key here. Simply giving a drug and moving on is not going to work with GLP-1s any better than the fad diets have in the past. But I think it's very important here. You will see the debates online and even in family dinners now. It's, in my day, We had to buck up and you just ate less. And that's how you lost weight. And you just got to do that. And it's temperance, it's prudence. These are basic things. And, a godly person would not be overeating. But if you look at our society, in the 70s, maybe 15% of people were overweight, maybe 5% were morbidly obese. Now we're at 40% and climbing. And morbid obesity is at 10% and climbing. These are significant health concerns. And this new medication, a lot of people think of it as cheating. Oh, I'm not cheating. I'm doing this all on my own. It's not a GLP-1. Well, the individuals who suffer from obesity are surrounded by a number of triggers. It's not just advertisements. It's food in the lunchbox. It's food in the grocery stores. It's everywhere. And what has our society done? We've done a number of things. We learned how to use dopamine hooks. If you don't know about dopamine hooks, you may be seeing it right now because you're watching this on Snapchat or you're watching this somewhere, and that doom scrolling, that's a dopamine hook. But that's the same thing that has occurred to the human body. Some people are more susceptible. And as you see those 40% of obesity and climbing, that's those individuals who are susceptible to this, to these dopamine hooks. But it's not just the dopamine hooks, it's the sugars that have been added to every single thing you buy. Nearly every food you buy now has some type of additive and in sugar. And why is that? It's to make it shelf stable forever and tasty, not perhaps nutritious. And so this idea of just buck up, well, it's failed. I can promise you it's failed. Look at the number, the percentage of obesity climb, but also how much money are we spending to lose weight? We were spending $30 billion in the 80s to lose weight. Now we're pushing $100 billion a year to lose weight. And guess what? We are failing. We are failing. And the consequences are devastating. The non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is becoming an epidemic. It's horrible.
And PCOS even, the instances of PCOS are rising in young girls who have just hit puberty. Why is that? Because of everything they're exposed to in their environments and these processed sugars and foods, right?
Absolutely.
So, we're doing their fertility, which at 16, they're not thinking about that, but they should be, and their provider should be thinking about their future ability to conceive children, even when they're new into puberty.
Yes. So I would say, I look at GLP-1s very much like I would look at a cast on someone who broke their leg. So do you have to have a cast for your leg to heal? No, it sure helps. I'm promising you it sure helps. And in fact, it would probably be considered torture not to do that. I see that as the same thing. Let's look objectively. Are we able to do this on our own? No, we are not. We are failing as a society to control this. Is this the solution? Is it a free lunch and we get, no, it's not, but it is a tool. It's a tool that's imperfect and it has risks, but those risks are certainly less than the risks of those who suffer from obesity and severe type 2 diabetes. So used in a proper regimen alongside the things that Ashlynn has mentioned, that's all GLP-1s are, is a tool. It's a very good tool. It's a very effective tool, but it is a tool, and in the right hands can really have amazing impacts on one's life.
I agree. So I hope you were able to learn what GLP-1s are by listening to this, clear up some questions you may have or false pretenses on these medications. And that, truly just like any conversation about your own health, you should receive full informed consent on what these medications can do. So I hope that was helpful, and these should be ongoing discussions that you're having with us if we're your providers or you're a provider. And, I think it's helpful to remember, as, Paul wrote in his letter to the Corinthians, your body is a temple. Don't you know that God created you? And back to how miraculous that we discovered this odd lizard, that we can develop these amazing medications. Are they amazing for everyone? No, but they, can be utilized in some way. How can we be the best version of ourselves and using medications doesn't mean that we're taking the easy way out. I think it's important to remember. So talk to your doctor, ask us questions on Instagram if you think of any. And I'd love, Dr. Ed, if you could close us in prayer.
Sure. All right. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Catch you in the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To learn more, you can visit our website at fiathealth.org. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. This helps make the podcast easier to find. Lastly, if you'd like to reach out, ask a question, or suggest a topic for a future show, send us an email at media@fiathealth.org. God bless.